Welcome to Midnight Chapters, where shadows talk and secrets walk. Tonight, you're invited to the brownstone of the great Nero Wolfe, where a widow's kiss sparks a deadly puzzle even he cannot ignore. Sit back, listen closely, and, watch the pieces fall into place. You could set your watch by the sound of the elevator cables groaning outside Nero Wolfe's brownstone. At exactly 10 minutes past 9 every morning, Fritz would glide upstairs with Wolfe's breakfast tray. Wolfe would bellow something irritable about eggs or toast, and I'd sit at my desk flipping through the morning papers while pretending not to hear them argue about butter quality. That morning was no different until the doorbell rang. I don't mean the doorbell of a normal house, the kind you politely press with your gloved finger. Wolfe's doorbell is more like a church bell, solid, serious, and unforgiving. When it rings, you hear it in your teeth. It was just shy of 9:15, which was a full hour before the world was legally allowed to disturb Nero Wolfe. I set down the Gazette, stood and shot a glance up the stairs where I could hear the faint clink of cutlery and a man-sized sigh. "Archie." Wolfe's voice floated down, heavy with suspicion. "What is that infernal noise?" "Someone wants to talk to you before you've had your toast," I called back, heading for the door. "Shall I shoot them or let them in?" No answer, which, in Wolfe's language, meant use your judgment, but make it quick, the woman on. The stoop was already reaching for the bell again when I opened the door. She froze, hand poised, her mouth half open like she was caught mid-prayer. She was tall, almost as tall as me, with a black veil covering most of her face, but not enough to hide the kind of cheekbones you could hang a hat on. Everything about her was black dress, black gloves, black shoes polished to a military shine. Even her handbag was the color of midnight, and twice as mysterious, she clutched it to her chest like it contained either her last dollar or the nuclear. "Codes, I need to see Mr. Wolfe," she said, her voice soft but with an edge, like silk hiding a knife. "Well, he needs to finish his breakfast, but you're welcome to come in and wait while I see how far I can push my luck." I stepped back. She glided past me, leaving a faint smell of something expensive and floral. Orchids, maybe, which was either an incredible coincidence or a bold move, considering who she was here to see. She sat on the edge of the red leather chair by the door, perfectly upright, her knees together, gloved hands resting in her lap. Even sitting still, she gave off the sort of tension you'd find in a room just before lightning struck. I leaned against my desk, gave her my best office smile, and said, "Archie Goodwin, you've got me for the price of admission. Your name?" She hesitated, then slipped one gloved hand up to her veil and lifted it just high enough to reveal a mouth painted the kind of red they warn kids about. "I am Mrs. Lydia Carnell," she said finally, "and I need Mr. Wolfe's help immediately." That word, immediately, hits different coming from someone who looks like she's already halfway to a funeral. "I'll check his schedule," I said, trying not to grin. "But I warn you, his idea of immediate involves at least finishing his coffee first." At that moment, Wolfe himself appeared at the top of the stairs, which, if you know Wolfe, you'll understand was as shocking as hearing your dog start reciting Shakespeare. He was in his mustard-colored dressing gown, eyes narrowed, lips pressed into a line so tight it could slice cheese. "Goodwin," he said, his voice a warning shot, "why are you entertaining guests without consulting me?" I gestured toward the woman like I was presenting a prizefighter. "Mrs. Carnell, meet Nero Wolfe. Mrs. Carnell claims she needs you." Immediately, Wolfe's gaze fell on her, and for a long moment he just stood there, sizing her up like she was a new breed of orchid he didn't quite trust. Finally, he descended, which in itself was an event worth calling the papers about, and stopped 3 feet from her chair. "You have my attention, madam," he said. "Do not abuse it." She stood, and that's when the handbag in her lap slid open just enough for something to fall out. I bent and picked it up. It was a photograph, black and white, slightly faded, but clear enough. A man in his 40s, lying on what looked like a marble floor, eyes closed, suit rumpled. And there on his cheek, plain as day, was a lipstick mark, the same shade of red she was wearing now. Wolfe frowned, his eyes flicking from the photo to her lips and back again. Mrs. Carnell swallowed hard and whispered, "My husband." was found dead last night. But that mark, that kiss, I didn't put it there. I raised an eyebrow at Wolf. He just stared at the photo for another long, silent beat, then muttered, almost to himself, "Confound it, Goodwin. Not before coffee." And with that, he turned and headed back upstairs. Mrs. Carnell sank back into her chair, clutching her handbag, her shoulders rigid. I tucked the photo into my breast pocket and said, "Don't worry, Mrs. Carnell, he always comes around eventually. It's just a matter of butter and timing." She didn't smile, and just then the morning sun broke through the window, catching the faint shimmer of her lipstick on the edge of the photo peeking from my pocket, like a tiny, bloody flag daring us to follow it if there's a worse crime. In Nero Wolfe's book than murder, it's interrupting his routine, and yet, at exactly 9:16 that morning, just as Fritz was serving the eggs, and I was halfway through the crossword, the doorbell blared like Gabriel himself blowing his horn. Wolf froze, fork in hand, and turned his head toward me without looking. "Goodwin." He said my name like I'd somehow arranged the whole thing just to spite him. "Yes, sir," I said, setting the pencil down and swinging my legs off the desk. "Someone seems to think their business is more important than your eggs. I'll go ruin their day." The doorbell rang again before I even reached the vestibule, a long, impatient buzz that made me want to arrest them myself. I swung open the door and had my first surprise of the day. She was already pulling her glove off when I opened up. A tall woman, mid-30s, dressed in black from head to toe. Black veil, black coat, black pumps with a heel sharp enough to double as a weapon. The veil was thin enough for me to catch the glint of her eyes, but thick enough to keep her intentions nullly fogged. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her heels clicking against the marble like a metronome. "I need to see Mr. Wolfe," she said. Her voice low but crisp, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who had spent a lot of time telling other people what to do and getting away with it. "Don't we all?" I said, shutting the door behind her. "You've got a name?" She peeled back her veil just enough to show me a flash of red lipstick and high cheekbones. "Mrs. Lydia Vale," she said. "I believe Mr. Wolfe will want to hear what I have to say." "They all think that," I muttered. Behind us, there came the faintest sound of a dramatic sigh from the dining room doorway. Wolfe himself, a vast silhouette in his dressing gown, filling the frame. He was watching us the way a cat watches a bird that's flown into the wrong cage. "You have exactly 60 seconds, Madame," he said, his voice thick with irritation and eggs, "to convince me that you are not a catastrophe." Mrs. Vale glanced at me, then back at him, without a word. She unfastened her handbag, pulled out an envelope, and handed it to me. "For Mr. Wolfe," she said. The envelope was black, sealed in red wax. Dramatic enough to give even Wolfe pause. Though he'd rather eat a live snake than admit it, I handed it up to him. He cracked the seal, peeled the flap open, and drew out a single sheet of heavy cream paper. He unfolded it with that particular rustling sound expensive paper makes. For a few seconds the room was silent, but for the faint hum of traffic outside and the paper between his fingers, I watched his eyebrows climb. Not high, but enough to suggest that his day had officially been ruined. He finished reading, folded the sheet back in perfect thirds, and slipped it into his pocket. Then he turned and started climbing the stairs without another word. Mrs. Vale and I stood there in silence until I couldn't help myself. "Well," I said, "that went better than most. At least he didn't throw you out." "He will listen," she murmured, adjusting her veil. "He must. I'm not here for myself." "Oh?" I asked, walking her toward the office. She stopped dead, looked straight at me through the gauze, and said, "I'm here because my husband is dead, and I didn't put that kiss on his cheek." That earned her my full attention. She opened her purse again and produced a photograph, black and white, glossy, of a man lying in what looked like a marble-floored lobby. He was very clearly dead, and very clearly kissed, a vivid lipstick mark on his cheek like a signature no one could miss. "I found him like this at 1 this morning," she said quietly. "I swear to you I didn't do that. But someone wants everyone to believe I did. And if they succeed, Mr. Wolfe," she faltered, swallowed, "I will hang." Before I could answer, Wolf's voice drifted down the stairs like a thundercloud. "Goodwin, bring the lady up. And for pity's sake, bring the photograph too." I slipped the photo into my breast pocket and shot her a reassuring grin. "See? He's hooked already, happens every time." She didn't smile back. Her heels clicked on the stairs as I followed her up, and I swear I could still hear the faint rustle of that paper in Wolf's pocket, whispering promises of a very long day. Mrs. Lydia Vale didn't walk into Wolf's office so much as glide, the way a ship moves into harbor, slow but impossible to stop. I stayed half a step behind her, partly because it's polite and partly because I wanted to watch Wolf's expression when she sat down in his red leather chair without waiting to be told. It was worth it. His right eyebrow arched just a hair, and his lips pressed into a line. "That could have cut glass, madam," he said flatly. "That chair is mine. Kindly relocate." She blinked once, rose gracefully, and settled into the client's chair opposite him. If she was rattled, it didn't show, which in my book meant she was already at least half dangerous. Wolf sat. He was wearing his second-best orchid yellow housecoat now, having changed upstairs, which in itself was a sign he meant to endure her for at least 5 minutes. "Goodwin," he said, not bothering to look at me, "the photograph, if you please." I slipped it out of my pocket and handed it over. Wolf unfolded it delicately and studied it with a slow, deliberate stare. Then he set it down, adjusted the paperweight on top of it, as though securing a butterfly to a board, and finally spoke. "Your husband," he said. "Not a question, a statement." "Yes," she murmured. Wolf's eyes flicked to hers, then back to the photo. "And you did not embellish him?" "I did not," she said evenly. I leaned back against the bookshelf and crossed my arms. "Yet here we are, with a dead man in a hotel lobby, wearing your signature on his cheek." "How do you figure that happened?" For the first time she hesitated, the smallest catch in her breath. "I don't know," she said, which was technically true but delivered with just enough polish to mean something else entirely. Wolf let out a faint snort and leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "I detest equivocation," he announced. Mrs. Vale straightened her shoulders as though bracing for a gust of wind. "My husband and I were not close," she admitted. "We had separate rooms. Separate lives, really. But divorce was not an option. Not for him. Not for me." Her tone was calm, too calm, but I caught the way her knuckles whitened on her handbag as she spoke. "Why not?" I asked. She gave me a glance sharp enough to slice through tin. "Because," she said slowly, "he would never allow it. And I could never afford it. Do you understand?" I didn't, not entirely, but Wolf, of course, nodded faintly as though she'd just recited a line of scripture. He said. "So you did not kill him. You did not kiss him. You merely found him thus and what? Fled? No," she said quickly, too quickly. Then she caught herself, drew in a breath, and corrected her tone. "No, I called the police." Wolf made a small noise of disgust and shifted in his chair. "And told them what?" "That I found him dead in the hotel lobby," she replied. "I did not mention the mark." "That got me. You didn't mention it?" I asked. "You mean to tell me you left out the part where your lipstick was stamped on his face like a tax seal?" Her eyes met mine, cool and level. "I didn't leave it," she said softly. "Whoever put it there wanted me to be the obvious suspect. I wasn't going to make it any easier for them." Wolf grunted, but his fingers drummed once against the arm of his chair, which, if you know him, is the equivalent of a standing ovation. "You have enemies, then?" he said simply. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "Plural." "Yes, any who also possess your shade of lipstick?" Her lips twitched, just for a second. "Perhaps," she admitted. Wolf settled back in his chair with the air of a man who'd just been handed an annoyingly solvable crossword. "Madam," he said, "you are either profoundly foolish or profoundly clever." "Possibly both. Will you take my case?" she asked. He closed his eyes and sighed, the kind of sigh that could have blown out a candle on the far side of the room. "Goodwin," he murmured, eyes still closed. "What do you say?" I caught her looking at me then, the faintest plea hiding behind the iron mask of her expression. I shrugged. Well, I said, if nothing else, she certainly knows how to make an entrance. Why not? Wolf opened his eyes, shot me a look of monumental annoyance, and finally nodded once, as though I'd just ruined his entire week. Very well, he said. You have hired me, Mrs. Vale. Congratulations. Kindly don't speak unless spoken. T.O., and don't lie unless absolutely necessary. I detest that as well. She inclined her head, her lips curling just enough to almost be called a smile. Wolf picked up the photograph again, tapping it with one thick finger. This, he said, is grotesque, which means it is also intriguing. And God help me, I am intrigued. It was exactly 10:32 when I hit the sidewalk outside the brownstone, armed with nothing but the photograph, a notebook, and Wolf's parting advice, don't get shot. And don't expect me to bail you out of jail if you say something idiotic. Wise words. The morning was sharp, with a wind that tried to peel my hat off, and the heels of Mrs. Vale's story still echoing in my head. I had 3 names she'd muttered as people who might have an interest in framing her, which is rich. I've met jealous husbands before, but jealous widows, that's a new sport. The husband's business partner. Wears pinstripes. Like armor, slicks his hair like a mirror, and greets you with a handshake that feels like he's testing you for fractures. He stood behind his mahogany desk and gave me a tight smile when I introduced myself. I already spoke to the police. He said, voice like ice on glass. Sure, I said. But you haven't spoken to me yet. Entirely different experience. His eyes narrowed, but he sat down. I didn't kill Charles, he said flatly. And I don't know who kissed him either. Though, if I had to guess, it's someone tired of waiting for him to keep his promises. Promises? I prompted. He just smirked and glanced at his watch. When I stood to go, he called after me. Tell Mrs. Vale I said hello. If she's still alive by the end of this. A nightclub. Singer with a voice like velvet over gravel. Blonde, with a laugh that sounded rehearsed, she leaned against the bar, stirring her drink like it had wronged her personally. Charles Vale was a pig, she said matter-of-factly. But he paid well, that's what counted. I showed her. The photo. She whistled. Nice touch. Very her? You mean Lydia? Marla arched an eyebrow. Who else? She's been waiting for an excuse to put him in the ground since before I met him. And you? I asked, and gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I just sing, she said. And I know better than to kiss dead men. Ruins the lipstick. A mild-looking man with ink on his cuffs and nervous hands. Former classmate of Charles Vale, now an accountant. Apparently, he looked up from his ledger and blinked at me as though I'd just interrupted a particularly good dream. Yes, he admitted after I'd laid it all out for him. I knew Charles. We have business. When I pressed him, he tugged at his tie. Business, he said again. Weaker this time. Look, I said, leaning on his counter. You're not fooling anyone. Either you tell me why you hated him, or I assume you loved his wife. His ears turned red. Neither, he stammered. But Charles was cruel. To everyone. To her most of all. If he's dead, it's no surprise, but it wasn't me. I left him fiddling with his pen like it was the last anchor holding him to the earth. 3 suspects, 3 flavors of guilt, and 1 lipstick mark no one wanted to claim. The wind kicked up again, rattling the street signs as I flipped my notebook shut and headed back toward the brownstone, Marla with her dry laughs, Blaine with his veiled threats, Winslow with his nervous hands. It's funny how fast people start singing. When they think no one's really listening, I crossed the avenue, heels echoing against the pavement, and thought about the photograph in my pocket. Maybe Wolf would already have some brilliant theory about who planted that kiss. I kiss? Me? I just knew everyone I'd spoken to already wanted Mrs. Vale to hang for it, and not one of them had the decency to hide it very well. You never really get used to finding bodies. You tell yourself you're too tough to flinch. And then one turns up where you least expect it, like under the stairs of a quiet little bookshop, and you realize you've been lying to yourself. I was halfway down the block from Winslow's place when I heard the sirens. Not the loud kind, not yet, but the soft, Rising wail of trouble just getting started. By the time I doubled back, a small crowd had gathered in front of the shop. A uniform was already unspooling yellow tape across the door, and Winslow himself was nowhere in sight. "Hey," I said, flashing my license to the nearest cop. "That's my witness in there." "What's the situation?" The cop, short, balding, with a pencil-thin mustache, gave me the kind of look usually reserved for cockroaches and door-to-door salesmen. "Your witness just became your victim," he said. "Step aside." He didn't have to say more. Through the open door, I could see the edge of a body lying face up near the counter, one hand curled under like he'd been trying to hold himself up before he dropped. Winslow. Dead. I didn't need the chalk outline or the smell of blood and paper to tell me that there was no lipstick this time. No cute signature. Just a thin red line at the base of his skull that suggested someone had gotten very close and very quiet before striking. I backed out before the cops could start asking me the questions, and I didn't stop walking until the brownstone's door was shut behind me. Wolf was at his desk, sipping beer with the faintest air of boredom when I came in. "Well?" he said without looking up. I tossed my hat on the rack and leaned against the wall. "Well," I echoed, "Arthur Winslow is dead. Somebody cracked him on the back of the head, probably just after I left." Wolf finally glanced up, eyebrows raised no more than a millimeter. "Ah," he said, as though I'd just informed him it might rain later. "You don't say," he added after a beat. "I do say," I shot back. "He's laid out behind his own counter like yesterday's stock report. No kiss this time, either, unless the killer left it somewhere less photogenic." Wolf made a small noise that could have been mistaken for a cough, but was actually his way of hiding interest. "Describe," he said. I sketched it out. The blood, the cops, the body language of the bystanders. When I got to the part about no lipstick mark, Wolf's eyes actually narrowed for a split second. He murmured. "Curious." I planted myself in the chair opposite him. "Curious," he says. "Wolf, somebody's escalating. One stiff in a hotel lobby is one thing, but now we've got a second corpse, and this one happened under my nose. Whoever's doing this isn't just tidy, they're fast." He waved a hand dismissively, reaching for another beer. "That is what murderers do, Mr. Goodwin. They kill." "Sure," I said. "But you should have seen Winslow earlier. He was rattled, but he still had some backbone. Now someone made sure he won't be rattling anything ever again. That suggests urgency." Wolf sipped his beer, then set it down with deliberate care. "It suggests," he corrected, "that Mr. Winslow knew something he was about to say, and someone judged silence preferable." "Did he say anything to you? Anything suggestive?" "Only that Charles Vale was cruel to everyone, and that if he was dead, it was no surprise." Wolf sighed and leaned back, eyes half-lidded. "Indeed. Which is to say, nothing useful." "Useful or not," I countered, "Winslow's blood is on the floor now, and Mrs. Vale's name is still on everyone's lips. You're not seriously telling me you're not interested?" Wolf's eyes opened just a little wider, catching the light like a pair of lazy coins. "I am intrigued," he admitted, "but not yet compelled." "Then what's it going to take?" I demanded. He closed his eyes again and rested his hands on his stomach. "I imagine," he said, "that our quarry will inform me in due course." "They usually do. Meanwhile, I suggest you rest. The police will have their hands full with Mr. Winslow, which buys us time." I rose, my chair scraping the floor louder than I meant it to. "Sure," I said. "I'll just go catch up on my beauty." "Sleep while someone else decides who's next on the list?" "Excellent idea," Wolf murmured, already reaching for another beer, but I could tell, from the faint crease between his brows, that he was thinking, which for Wolf meant the game was well and truly on, and for me, it meant the next body could land even closer. When Wolf wants out of a case, he doesn't just say it. That would be too easy, and too human. No, Wolf performs. It started the next morning, over breakfast, when he scowled at his eggs like they'd personally betrayed him. "Goodwin," he grumbled, pushing his plate away. "This is intolerable." "What's intolerable?" I asked, reaching for my toast. He shot me a look so full of disdain it could have curdled cream. "This." Case, he said. That woman, that kiss. That corpse. He stabbed a finger toward the newspaper lying folded beside his plate. Headlines screaming about Winslow's untimely demise. The whole sordid mess, he added, his voice rising like a baritone warming up for an aria. Ah, I said mildly. You mean the job you agreed to take? The one where you let her hire us? That case? Wolf glared at me. I was beguiled, he admitted darkly. Momentarily softened by her theatrics. A lapse for which I blame you entirely, since you encouraged me? You're welcome, I said. He ignored me, rising from the table, which is never a good sign, because Wolf rising voluntarily before noon usually means he's about to make a grand declaration. Sure enough, he planted himself in the middle of the office, hands clasped behind his back, and announced, I am done, finished. I shall inform Mrs. Vale forthwith that she is free to consult some other unfortunate. I set my coffee cup down. You sure about that? I asked. Quite, he sniffed. Because, I went on, if you're quitting, you'll have to tell her yourself. And you'll have to explain to the police why we're walking away from 2 murders and a suspect whose name happens to be written in lipstick on a corpse's cheek. That got me a slow turn of his head and a withering stare. You, he said, are enjoying this. I grinned, like Christmas morning. I admitted. Wolf exhaled through his nose, the sound of a man suffering immeasurable indignity. Bah, he said finally, collapsing into his chair. You're not quitting. I told him, he harumphed, reaching for a beer. You cannot force me, he muttered. Of course not, I said cheerfully. But if you quit, you'll have to go back. To her, hat in hand, and tell her you're giving up because it's beneath you. Which, for a man of your towering ego, would probably be fatal. That earned me a sour glance over the rim of his glass. You think yourself clever, he said. I know myself clever, I said. Besides, you're already hooked. You can't let whoever did this get away with insulting your intelligence, your orchids, and your routine all in one go. Wolf paused at that, his fingers drumming on the arm of his chair. I admit, he said reluctantly, there is a certain effrontery about it. Exactly, I said, and you hate effrontery. He sighed, long, dramatic, and so loud. You'd think I'd just asked him to dance a jig in the street. Very well, he said at last. We proceed. But I do so under protest. This entire business is odious. I grinned wider. Noted, I said. Now, should I call Mrs. Vale and tell her the good news, or would you like to surprise her? Bah, he said again, waving me off. Do as you please. I stood grabbing my coat. Oh, I will, I said, heading for the door as I closed. Behind me I could hear him muttering to himself. Odious. Entirely odious. But from the way he was already reaching for the case file, I knew better. Wolf may hate to admit it, but once his curiosity's been piqued, you couldn't drag him off a case with a team of horses. You can't always predict what's going to turn the whole thing on its head, Dot. Sometimes it's a confession. Sometimes it's a footprint where it shouldn't be. And sometimes it's just a scrap of paper tucked into the wrong pocket. This time, it was a receipt. I'd swung by the precinct to drop off a note Wolf dictated to Inspector Kramer. Dictated, being a polite way of saying Wolf barked at me like a sergeant major when the desk sergeant handed me a small envelope. This was found on Winslow's body, he said. Your boss might want it. Or he might burn it and pretend he solved the case without it. Either way, it's yours now. I thanked him, stuffed it in my pocket, and didn't bother looking at it until I was back at the brownstone. You are late, he announced as I came in. Only by your standards, I said, tossing my hat on the rack. And before you ask, no, I did not shoot anyone, seduce anyone, or steal any police evidence, not intentionally anyway. Wolf grunted. I pulled the envelope from my pocket and flicked it onto his blotter. What's this? He asked as though it might explode. Something they pulled off Winslow, I said. And you'll want to look at it before you dismiss it as irrelevant. He eyed it, sighed, and slid it open with his gold letter opener. Inside was a crumpled receipt from a florist, dated the morning before Winslow was killed, with a single line, 1 bouquet, 12 white orchids. Delivered to Marla Devine. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Ah, he said softly. That's all you've got to say? I asked. Ah, he repeated, and then added, "So, Winslow sent flowers to the Chanteuse." "Curious." "More than curious." I said, "You don't send 12 white orchids to someone you just met at a poker table." Wolf picked up the receipt delicately between two fingers, studying it like a biologist inspecting a new species of fungus. "Indeed," he murmured. He leaned back and closed his eyes. "This complicates things," he said. "How so?" "Mrs. Vale claimed Winslow despised her husband Charles," Wolf mused. "And yet he maintained enough connection with Mrs. Devine to send her a token of affection. That implies either duplicity on Winslow's part or hers." I crossed my arms. "So now what?" "You want me to pay Marla another visit?" He opened one eye. "Please do so," he said, "with care. I suspect her temperament is volatile." "Volatile," I echoed. "I can handle volatile." "I doubt that," Wolf muttered, already reaching for the orchid sprayer, "but go nonetheless." "Well," she said, tilting her head, "look who came back to see me. Couldn't stay away. I make it a policy to revisit anyone who sends or receives expensive flowers right before a murder." I said. Her smile froze for just a second before it slid back into place. "Flowers?" she asked lightly. I held up the receipt. She took a drag on her cigarette, blew smoke toward the ceiling. "I didn't kill him," she said flatly. "I didn't say you did," I replied. "But you sure made him think you liked him enough to send you orchids." Marla stubbed out her cigarette and rose slowly, crossing the room until she was inches away. "You think I asked for those?" she said. "Did you send him back a thank you card?" I asked her. Her eyes flashed. "You're cute," she said. "But you don't know anything about me." Charles Vale was poison, and Winslow was his errand boy. If either of them thought I was gonna fall for their games, they were dumber than they looked. Then why take the flowers? She laughed bitterly. "Because white orchids look good in my apartment, and because throwing them in his face would have been bad for business. Now get out." She turned away, and just before I closed the door, I heard her mutter something, soft, almost to herself. "They never learn, do they?" "Well?" I asked. Wolf smiled faintly. "Well," he murmured, "the net begins to tighten." "On Marla?" He shook his head ever so slightly. "On someone," he said. "Not yet clear which one, but the pattern is emerging." "And once I see the pattern?" He let that hang in the air while he reached for his beer. I sat back, feeling the prickle of something dangerous taking shape. When a suspect starts sweating, you don't back off. You lean in, and if you're me, you do it with a smile. Because nothing rattles people faster than knowing you're enjoying yourself after my little chat with Marla Devine, which ended with her flinging a powder puff at my head. I decided to pay a visit to a certain Mr. Peter Carleton. Carleton was Vale's business partner. Silent type on the books, but loud enough around town to make enemies. According to the file Wolf had me compile, he stood to gain the most if both Vale and Winslow were out of the picture. I found him in his office. A sleek glass box on the 22nd floor with a view of the river and a desk so clean it looked rented. He stood when I came in, buttoning his jacket like a man meeting an auditor he didn't request. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, voice cool. "I understand you're working for Mrs. Vale." "That's the rumor," I said, dropping into a chair without waiting to be asked. "You've been keeping busy, Mr. Carleton." His lips twitched just enough to tell me he didn't like the tone. "I run a business," he replied. "And a neat little side venture, too," I said. "You and Vale, one of you ends up dead, and now Winslow joins the party. Kind of makes you the last man standing, doesn't it?" Carleton's fingers curled around the edge of his desk. "That's absurd," he snapped. "Is it?" I leaned back. "You hated Vale. Everybody says so. Winslow, too. And yet, here you are, breathing while they're not." For the first time, his composure cracked. "Just a hairline fracture, but I saw it." "You think I killed them?" he demanded, voice climbing half an octave. I think," I said slowly, "that you know more than you're letting on. About Vale, about Winslow, about that little arrangement you all had." He sat back, exhaling through his nose like a bull deciding whether or not to charge. "I don't owe you anything," he said. "Quieter now." I smiled faintly. "No," I agreed. "But you owe yourself some sleep." "Which you won't get as long as you're sitting on whatever it is you're sitting on." For a long moment he didn't say anything. Then he reached for a glass decanter on the corner of his desk and poured himself a double. His hand shook just enough to rattle the ice. "You don't understand," he muttered. "Help me," I said. He swallowed half the glass before looking at me. "Vale," he said finally, "wasn't just cruel, he was dangerous. He had things on all of us. Photographs, letters, things that would ruin reputations, marriages, businesses. Winslow was just the messenger boy, but the real threat was Vale." I stayed quiet, letting him talk. I thought, he continued, that when Vale died, it would be over. But then Winslow came to me saying he'd inherited the files. He wanted money to keep them quiet. He said if I didn't pay up, he'd go public. "And?" I asked. "And now he's dead?" Carlton said grimly. "So you tell me, Mr. Goodwin, do you think that's a coincidence?" I stood, straightening my tie. "No," I said, "I don't." He drained his glass, staring down at the empty desk as though it might offer him absolution. "Whatever you think of me," he muttered. "I didn't kill them. But someone is cleaning house. And if you're smart, you'll stay out of their way." I didn't bother answering that. Instead, I walked to the door and paused. "You should really learn to lie better," I said. "Next time you play innocent, at least keep your hand steady." I let the door click shut behind me and headed for the elevator. "Well?" he asked without looking up. He cracked. I said. Wolf glanced at me over the rim of his glasses. "But not enough to confess?" "Not quite, but he knows more than he wants to admit. About Vale, Winslow, blackmail, and whoever's next." "In line." Wolf set his book down, steepling his fingers. "Ah," he murmured. "The shadow lengthens." "Yeah," I said, throwing myself into the chair opposite him, "and it's got sharp teeth." "You again," she said flatly. "Me." Again I agreed. "You've been ducking me, Marla, which is cute, but pointless." Her eyes narrowed. "You're persistent." "Always," I said. She sank into the armchair, crossing her legs in a way that said she still thought she was in control. "You've already asked your questions," she murmured. "Sure," I said, "but this time I know what to listen for." I pulled the small envelope from my pocket and let it drop onto the table between us. It slid across the glass top and stopped just shy of her fingers. "What's this?" she asked. "You tell me," I said. "Because inside is a marriage license. Issued to one Marla Devine and one Charles Vale 2 years ago in Atlantic City." She went very still. No quick laugh. No sharp retort. Just the softest intake of breath and then silence so heavy it pressed against my ribs. "Ah," I said. "So we do understand each other." She reached for the envelope with slow, deliberate fingers but didn't open it. "I suppose," she said quietly, "there's no point denying it." "Not unless you enjoy embarrassing yourself," I said. She smiled faintly, sad this time, not sharp. "I married him," she admitted, voice soft now. "But he made me keep it quiet. He said it would ruin his business dealings if anyone knew. Said I was his secret indulgence." Her laugh was brittle enough to cut glass, but then he started showing up less and less. She continued. "Stopped calling, started threatening me, said he'd expose me as some kind of gold digger if I ever breathed a word. And all the while he kept seeing other women." Her hands trembled now as she finally lit her cigarette. "I stayed quiet, because I thought maybe he'd come back around," she said. "Maybe he'd remember he loved me." I let that hang in the air for a beat before I spoke. "And Winslow?" I asked. She looked up sharply. "Winslow found out?" she admitted. "He showed me the license one night, said he'd gotten hold of it, and if I didn't play nice, he'd let everyone know. Said he could make my life hell if I didn't cooperate." Her jaw tightened, so I cooperated. "Until now." I nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. "Vale kept you hidden," I said. "Winslow squeezed you for it. And now they're both dead." She met my eyes then, and for the first time she didn't look angry or defensive. "Just tired. I didn't kill them," she said quietly. I believed her, or at least, I believe she believed herself. I stood and slipped the envelope back into my pocket. "I don't care who killed them," she added suddenly, her voice low. "Whoever it was, thank you." "She cracked," I reported. Wolf raised one brow. "Oh? She and Vale were married," I said. Secretly. Winslow found out and blackmailed her. Wolf's lips twitched into the faintest shadow of a smile. As I suspected, he murmured. You suspected? I said. You couldn't have told me that before I walked into the lion's den? He reached for his beer. With an air of infinite patience, My dear Archie, he said, the value of discovery is not merely in the knowing, it is in the telling. That, I said, dropping into my chair, is a very fancy way of saying you enjoy watching me squirm. Indeed, he said calmly. I shook my head, but I couldn't help smirking. So I asked, what now? Wolf leaned back, eyes half closed. Now, he murmured, we let the masks fall, one by one. And eventually the killer will stand revealed, naked and ashamed. I had to admit he made it sound almost poetic. The first corpse had been a wake-up call. The second was a deadline. Wolf's office, just past dawn. The windows gray with morning light, the air smelling faintly of orchids and coffee. Wolf sat in his chair, motionless, hands folded, while I read from the morning edition spread across his blotter. Body found in East River identified as Peter Carleton. I quoted, business partner of slain financier Charles Vale. Wolf closed his eyes and exhaled through his nose. That was about as close as he came to screaming. I warned him. Wolf murmured, you did? I asked. I warned him, Wolf repeated. Ignoring me. The paper shook in my hands as I skimmed further. Police suspect foul play, I read aloud. Witnesses report Carleton entered a cab outside his office around 9 p.m. last night and was not seen alive again. Wolf finally opened his eyes, fixing me with a hard stare. This is intolerable, he said. Sure, I agreed, and also murder. But that seems to be the trend this week. He glared at me. Archie, he said icily, do you think I enjoy being shown up? By amateurs, by blunt instruments masquerading as men? Not particularly, I admitted. Then find them. He growled. The East River docks fog hanging low, a police cordon around the scene. Kramer's voice rising above the murmur of reporters. Goodwin? Kramer barked when he saw me. I raised a hand in greeting. Don't worry, Inspector, I called back. I won't touch anything. Damn right you won't, he snapped. Kramer looked like he hadn't slept, which put us on equal footing. He gestured toward the waterline, where a pair of divers were hauling up what was left of Carleton. You know what this means? Kramer muttered, pulling me aside. That someone's trying to make a point? I offered. That someone's cleaning? House, he said grimly. We had him under watch after your boss started dropping hints about Winslow and Vale. Now, he gestured toward the stretcher being loaded into the ambulance. Now we've got nothing but corpses and questions. Marla Devine's apartment. She stood in the doorway in a silk robe again. Mascara smudged like she hadn't slept either. You hear about Carleton? I asked. Her hands fluttered to her mouth, but there was no real shock in her eyes, just dread. I knew it, she whispered. Knew what? That he wouldn't stop, she said faintly. Whoever's behind this. They're not done. They won't be done until... She trailed off, her knuckles white against the doorframe. Until what? I pressed. Until everyone who knew about those files is gone, she said quietly. Wolf's office, late afternoon. Wolf sat ramrod straight, staring into space, his expression carved in stone. Well? I asked, dropping into my chair. He's dead, Wolf said simply. You don't say. I told Carleton, Wolf continued, that he was not clever enough to stay alive without my help. I nodded toward the orchids. You also told him you wouldn't help him unless he paid your fee. Wolf glared at me, a look that could have cracked granite. He refused. He said, and now he's dead. I concluded. Wolf tapped a finger against his blotter. This, he said, has become offensive. Oh? 2 deaths in my city, Wolf growled. Both occurring under my observation. The killer believes himself beyond my reach. He stood suddenly, which, let me tell you, is not something you see every day. I blinked. Wolf, I said cautiously, are you standing? Archie, he snapped, summon everyone. Tonight, my office. This ends. There was a fire in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time, and for the first time since the first body fell, I almost felt sorry for whoever was behind. Some men light up when they hear music. Wolf lights up. When he hears himself being clever. It was just past 8:30 p.m. when I returned to the brownstone, after making the rounds and delivering Wolf's summons to everyone still alive and worried. Enough to come. The suspects, or whatever they called themselves, were due in his office within the hour. When I stepped into the office, Wolf was still in his chair, of course, but the change in him was subtle and unmistakable, a faint gleam in his eye, the faintest upward curve of his lips. I paused in the doorway. "You look like a man who's all ready. Read tomorrow's headlines?" I said. He didn't even glance at me. Just kept his eyes fixed on something small and shiny in his fingers. A brass button. The infamous Wolf smirk was back. "You've seen this?" he asked without looking up. I crossed the room and leaned against the desk, peering at it. "Eh?" "Button," I said. "Congratulations, you've cracked the haberdashery angle." "Archie," he said dryly, "you would do well to observe before you jest." He pushed the button a half-inch closer to me. "From a woman's coat," he said. "So?" "Found," he continued, "in the carpet under my globe stand this morning. Left, presumably by one of our charming visitors yesterday evening. When you ushered them out in your usual haste, I presume you did not inspect the rug for souvenirs." "No," I admitted. "That's on me." "Yes," he agreed, "but you've got closets full of useless knickknacks from cases that went nowhere," I reminded him. "Why is this one any different?" "Because," he said, tapping the button lightly with one finger of the thread. I leaned closer. The back of the button still had a sliver of black thread hanging from it. Nothing special to my eyes. He saw me squint and allowed himself the smallest of laughs. "Do try, Archie," he murmured. "You're almost intelligent." When pressed, "All right," I said, "it's a button with black thread from a woman's coat. I assume the owner is missing one." He closed his eyes, savoring the moment before delivering the punchline. "Not merely missing one," he said, "but lying about it." I straightened. "Marla?" I guessed. "Possibly," he said. "Or Mrs. Vale, or—" His eyes opened, sharp now, fixed on me like searchlights. Someone who would rather see two men dead than have her secret exposed. I shook my head. Asterisk, "You really think a button is gonna pin the whole thing?" I asked. "I do not think," he said archly. "I know. When one removes the unnecessary noise, the bribes, the threats, the sordid pasts, what remains is the singular inconsistency, always." He rose, which, as usual, made me blink. "And in this instance," he said, tucking the button into a small velvet box, "the inconsistency is sewn to the truth by a single broken thread." I stared at him. "You're enjoying this?" I accused. He finally smiled, and not even a subtle one this time. "Yes," he said simply. The hallway. Outside his office. I followed him, scribbling notes as he muttered to himself. "Archie," he said, "fetch the woman's coat when she arrives. Tell her it requires brushing. Observe which sleeve lacks a button, and when she asks why I'm undressing her?" I asked. "Improvise," he said. I stopped walking. "You're not even worried, are you?" I asked. "Worried?" He echoed. Glancing back, he allowed himself one last, self-satisfied smirk before continuing to the office. "My dear Archie," he called over his shoulder, "I'm already correct. It's one of the immutable laws of the universe. Gravity pulls things down. The sun rises in the east, and Kramer always arrests the wrong guy first. Wolf's office, evening." The suspects were gathered, planted in the red chairs like wilted carnations. The air smelled faintly of orchids and hostility. Wolf sat behind his desk, hands steepled, radiating quiet triumph while I leaned against the wall, waiting for the fireworks. The door burst open. Wood slamming against the stop, Kramer's. Shoes stomping across the room. "Wolf!" Kramer barked. "Inspector," Wolf purred, without looking up. Kramer's eyes swept the room, narrowing when they fell on Marla Devine. He stalked over and yanked her to her feet by the elbow. "You're under arrest," he growled. Marla gasped, blinking, like she'd just been slapped. "You can't be serious," she whispered. "Oh, I'm serious," Kramer snapped. "Two dead men, both with ties to you and your cozy little secret marriage. You had motive, you had opportunity, and you're not nearly as clever as you think." She froze, then her chin lifted. I didn't kill them, she hissed. Wolf finally looked up then, wearing the kind of expression most people reserve for watching children spill soup on a Persian rug. Inspector, he said mildly, you are making a fool of yourself. Kramer's head whipped around. What? A fool? Wolf repeated, more slowly this time, like he was explaining the concept of arithmetic to a goldfish. Kramer's jaw worked, but no sound came out. I decided to help him out. Wolf means, I said helpfully, that you've got the wrong gal, again. Kramer shot me a look that could have melted lead. Oh yeah, he barked. Then maybe you'd like to explain this. A crisp paper rustle as he waved a report in Wolf's face. Witness saw her leaving Carlton's office the night he died. Kramer growled. Wolf didn't even flinch. Yes, he agreed. And she was retrieving her marriage certificate, which, in case you've forgotten, she confessed to Mr. Goodwin already. Hardly worth murdering over, wouldn't you say? Kramer glared at him, then at me. Is that true? Word for word, I said, spreading my hands. Kramer snorted. And you've got nothing better? Wolf's lips curled into a faint smile. Not of kindness, but of victory. Oh, I have better, he murmured. He reached into the velvet-lined box on his desk and plucked out the brass button we'd been admiring earlier. This, Wolf declared, is from the killer's coat. And the killer, Inspector, is not Mrs. Devine. Kramer stared at the button like it had just insulted his mother. You're telling me, he growled. That button clears her? It damns someone else, Wolf corrected smoothly. The suspects shifting in their chairs, their discomfort growing like weeds. The silence in the room was deafening now. Wolf placed the button back in the box with delicate precision, then folded his hands again. You may remove your hands from that woman, Inspector, Wolf said. Kramer hesitated. Then let go of Marla's arm with a grunt. You better be right about this, he muttered. Wolf smiled faintly. I invariably am, he said. Kramer stomped toward the door, muttering something under his breath. The rest of the room sat frozen. Waiting for the next move? Wolf tapped a finger on the edge of his blotter, his eyes scanning the suspects with quiet delight. I straightened from the wall and looked at him. You enjoying this? I asked under my breath. He smirked, which in Wolf's language meant yes, immensely. Wolf doesn't stand up lightly, and he doesn't send me out lightly either. So when he leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and uttered the words, Archie, go fetch it, I knew exactly what that meant. It meant this was it. Game point. The brownstone front door, my heels sharp against the marble as I bounded down the steps, the night air cool and tight on my skin. I slid into the Huron, started the engine, and let it roar down 35th Street. His instructions had been maddeningly vague, as usual. Find the coat. The one missing its button, the one they think I haven't noticed. And bring it here, with witnesses if possible. So, fine, I like a little drama. The Mayfair Hotel, lobby glimmering with crystal and self-importance. I strode through like I owned the place, flashed a grin at the night clerk, and headed for the elevator. The name on the register, written in Marla's neat script, was room 809, but she wasn't who I was here for. I rapped on the door anyway. Just for the sport of it. It opened an inch. Mr. Goodwin? A nervous voice asked. I pushed it open the rest of the way and stepped inside. There she was, Mrs. Vale, still dressed to kill, but not as sure of herself as she'd been in Wolf's office. Hello, sugar, I said. You left something at our place. Wolf says to tell you he's keeping it unless you'd like to explain. Her eyes darted to the coat slung across the chair. I followed her gaze and smiled. That's the one, I said, and moved to pick it up. She leapt forward. You can't take that, she blurted. Oh? I said, lifting the sleeve to show the empty spot where a brass button had once been. Why not? Planning to wear it to your arraignment? She froze, hands balled into fist. Then she laughed, a little too sharply, and sat back down on the bed, the rustle of the coat as I folded it over my arm. The faint click of the door shutting behind me. The elevator ride back down was quiet, except for the little voice in my head going, You got her. You got her good. The brownstone. I was back in under 20 minutes, tossing the coat onto Wolf's desk like a trophy. Here you go, I announced. One coat, vintage designer label. And missing exactly one button. Wolf opened the velvet box on his desk and plucked out the brass button with a flourish. It matches? He asked. Like gin matches tonic, I said. He smirked, that rare, gleaming, insufferable smirk of his, and set the button gently on the fabric. Excellent, he said softly. That will suffice. The suspects already seated in their chairs, Kramer grumbling by the window, and Wolf settling into his throne, resting one hand on the coat. That's it? I asked quietly. Wolf gave me a sidelong glance. That, he said, is everything. The orchids hummed faintly behind us. Kramer muttered something about a warrant under his breath. Mrs. Vale sat like stone, her eyes fixed on the floor, while Marla Devine clutched her purse with white knuckles. The rest waited, holding their collective breath. Wolf straightened his cuffs and let out a satisfied sigh. Archie, he murmured, prepare yourself. This will be instructive. He leaned back, closed his eyes for a moment as though savoring the final bite of a good meal, and then spoke. Some people pay good money to see a Broadway play. I get paid to watch Nero Wolfe put on his own private production, and let me tell you, the man knows how to stick the landing. Wolfe's office. Late evening. The lamps glow warm, but the air is colder than the orchids outside. All 5 suspects are seated in those uncomfortable red chairs, fidgeting, whispering, glancing at each other with suspicion and dread. Kramer stands by the door with his arms crossed, clearly not thrilled to be playing second fiddle, and Wolf sits behind his desk, calm as a Buddha who just solved a particularly nasty crossword puzzle. I leaned against the bookshelf, my notebook open but mostly for show. Watching faces is more my thing anyway. Marla Devine, flawless as ever, kept her gaze fixed on her expensive shoes. Mrs. Vale sat like she'd been carved out of marble, her hands folded tightly over her purse. The other 3, an oily lawyer named Parrish, a shifty accountant named Leach, and the late Mr. Carleton's secretary, Miss Hennessy, all looked equally miserable but in different flavors, Wolfe's chair creaking as he leaned forward. Fingers steepled, voice smooth as aged bourbon. Ladies and gentlemen, he began. You are here because you have all lied to me. Some more skillfully than others, but all nonetheless. Fortunately for you, your collective incompetence has made my task manageable. A little ripple of discomfort went through the room. Marla shifted in her chair. Parrish cleared his throat. Wolfe picked up the brass button from its velvet box and held it between his fingers. This, he said, was the first truth you left behind, dislodged in my office where you thought you were safe. And yet it was no ordinary button. It belonged to the coat Mrs. Vale tried to conceal in her hotel room, a coat now conveniently missing this very piece. Mrs. Vale stiffened but said nothing. Wolfe placed the button down and reached for his beer. More importantly, he continued after a sip, the coat itself smelled faintly of sandalwood, a detail which would have gone unnoticed if not for my orchids. You see, sandalwood is excellent at masking the smell of gun oil, and that Mrs. Vale is where you erred. Her jaw tightened, but she kept quiet. Kramer shifted impatiently by the door. So what? He barked. Plenty of people wear perfume. It doesn't mean she killed anybody. Wolfe let the corners of his mouth lift just slightly, his version of a full-blown grin. Quite right, Inspector. Perfume does not kill. But powder residue on the inside lining of the coat, combined with the missing button and Mrs. Vale's desperation to reclaim it, suggests that the coat, if properly examined, will reveal the burn mark of a discharged firearm. He leaned back, eyes half closed, which would place Mrs. Vale squarely at the scene of Mr. Carleton's death. Mrs. Vale finally spoke, her voice low and bitter. You can't prove that. She hissed. On the contrary, Wolfe replied. Mr. Goodwin collected 2 statements from the hotel staff who saw you discard the coat in the laundry chute. Your panic was palpable. Sound audible gasp from Miss Hennessy. Marla shot Mrs. Vale a venomous look. Parrish began dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. Wolfe's eyes swept the room, landing briefly on each of them like a searchlight. You all had reason to wish Mr. Carleton dead, he said. Mr. Leach to conceal embezzlement. Miss Hennessy because he threatened to expose your relationship. Mr. Parrish to take over his clients, Mrs. Vale because he intended to end your affair and disinherit you in favor of his legitimate wife. Marla flinched at that but kept her eyes down. Wolf tapped his finger on the desk. And yet only one of you was foolish enough to murder him here, in my office, and leave the evidence beneath my globe stand. Kramer stepped forward now, glaring at Mrs. Vale. You gonna talk? He growled. Or do I have to drag it out of you downtown? Mrs. Vale straightened in her chair. Her face was pale, but her eyes glittered with something halfway between anger and exhaustion. You think you're so clever, she spat at Wolf. Wolf sighed. I do not think, madam. I know. There was a long silence. Then she laughed, sharp and hollow, and finally nodded. All right, she muttered. I did it. He was going to ruin me. After everything I gave up for him, he was going to throw me aside like trash. So yes, I shot him. Sound, the quiet click of Kramer snapping handcuffs on her wrists, followed by the low murmur of the others as they shifted in their seats, realizing it was over. Wolf sat back in his chair, reached for his beer, and took a long, satisfied sip. Kramer grunted, You always have to show me up, don't you? Wolf raised an eyebrow. Inspector, he said smoothly, you make it too easy. As Kramer led Mrs. Vale out, Wolf gestured toward the remaining suspects. You may go, he told them curtly. If you have further mischief planned, kindly ensure it does not occur in my office. They filed out quickly, leaving behind only the faint smell of nerves and fear. I closed my notebook and gave Wolf a look. You really know how to ruin a woman's evening. I said. He glanced at me with a faint, indulgent smile. Archie, he murmured, fetch me another beer.